että tulitte. Lyhyesti esittään itseään. Nimeni on Tatjana Bergelt. Olen kuvataiteilija, syntynyt vuonna 1966 Berliinissä, Itä-Saksassa, ja sitten opiskelin Itä-Saksassa. Menin vaihto-opilaaksi Tallinnaan, silloinen Neuvostoliitto vielä. Siellä olleen muuri murtui, joten kun tulin takaisin, lähtin Pariisiin. Siellä opiskelin ja tein maisterin litografiassa ja maalaustaiteessa, ja samanaikaisesti tein maisterin siellä Saksassa Hallenburg-Kivikystein taidekoulussa. Ja sitten vuonna 1998 tulin Suomeen, ja täällä nyt olin viimeiset 23 vuotta Helsingissä. Eli tänään haluaisin puhua yhdestä projektista nimellä Dis Manibus. Ja niin kuin sanoin jo, mulla on vähän helpompi selittää, sujuvampi kaikki englannin kielellä, joten teidän luvalla tein sen englannin kielellä. So I want to present to you the content of my talk. I will talk about the background, the idea, the research involved, and the production of the artist book Dis Manibus. So it all started in Rome in 2018. I have been lucky to have been a fellow at the Institutum Romanum Finlandais, which was founded 1954, and there are many different researchers, archaeologists, art historians, history researchers, Latinists, and one artist. And in this case, the one artist was me. So the great thing is that you actually have access to the research libraries, you can get a recommendation, and you can actually access all different institutions which otherwise would be closed for artists. And of course, you get to be with the researchers when they have archaeological site excursions, and you can learn about history and epigraphy. So I wanted to show you two photos of the historical Rome which we admire nowadays. One of 1936 and the other one in our days taken at the Foil Embossing. So even the historical sites, they change, and what I realized being in Rome is that what you see is actually only the surface. Most of the archaeological and historical truth is underneath the ground. The burial sites, the cemeteries, they actually have proof and tell stories which we are looking for. So this is the surface, and underneath is actually happening everything. So what you see on top is not really the whole story. So I was thinking, how can I bring these layers of invisible history to the surface? So one possibility is to, like I already said, to access all these different institutions which are there. They are in wonderful places. The library at the École Française is in an old palace in Palazzo Farnese, which belonged to a cardinal. The library of the American Academy in Rome is at the same hill, Gianicolo, like the Villa Lante, and only 500 meters away from the Finnish institution. So when you go there, you have an enormous amount of historical information. As you see, if you still remember, I told you Villa Lante was founded in 1954. You can see Villa Medici in 1600s already. You have 5 different German institutions for research. You have the English, the Swedish, and so on. I mentioned only a few. This is the courtyard of the American Academy, and it plays a role in my presentation because I actually worked there. So I want you to pay attention to these walls, which have these inlaid stones. So these stones are actually the beginning for my project. These stones are the epigraphic stones. So what is epigraphy? Epigraphy is basically the study of inscriptions earlier on, and when I say earlier, I speak about before Christ. We didn't have paper, so all the information which we can still retrieve from the burial sites, for instance, they are basically hacked in stone. So there are different archives of these informations. You have the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum in Latin, in Greek, in Etruscan, and in Persian languages. So it's quite common for that period of time that there has been produced inscriptions in abbreviations. So it was because you didn't have a lot of space on the stone, they were always abbreviated, and then it developed a certain code. The historians, they can decode it very easily, but for me or for a lay person, it's a learning process. But you find out stories about men, mainly, because they were the ones who could pay and let them be done. Sometimes women and even children. You learn about the government, the law, all kind of announcements, even advertisements were done by hacking them in stone. So I have here an example. This is already translated into English and actually transcribed. So initially it had only 4 lines, but this is the story which you could find on a stone. And as you see, it's basically a story of a person's life. You learn much more than that he was born and died. You learn about his family situation, about his profession, his status, his inclinations, and so on. So I was fascinated by the fact that these stones, so small as they are, tell such a big story. And in addition to that, I heard a presentation by Rosa Kalunki. She is a PhD research student from the University of Tampere, and she has a very interesting PhD project because initially, when one studies history, one steps over the first stone, and this is usually the history of man. And then goes by a little bit of time, and then one finds something out about the women. And finally, now, we are actually able to find something out about children. So the children in Rome, they had also a role. They were given a role. Not everybody, but some. And Rosa Kalunki is studying the agency or the role of the children in ancient Rome, and that means 200 before and 200 after Christ. So in her presentation, she had shown us a slide, which you see on the very left, where she put in all these streets where the children would have walked on to commute from a certain point to a temple and to conclude their religious obligation or their role. And surprisingly to me, these streets, they still are in Rome, the same streets. So she put the streets into Google Map, and she got this little map which gives her the opportunity to walk this path. And so, by seeing that and having examined that there is a lot of material also to be found in the different libraries about children and Rome, children in classical antiquity and so on, I came to the idea. So the idea, I thought, was to get an imprint from these stones which relates to the research about children, and to imagine that I follow the child on this route through the ancient Rome, but it is today. And today being in the same streets, but imagining how it was then. And to build from that an artist book. So there were different challenges, because as you can see, they are marvelously beautiful, right? But they are not all very practical for doing a book. Sometimes they are too big. Sometimes they are half broken, which looks nice, but when you transfer it onto the paper, it's not understandable. Why is there a piece missing? Sometimes they have this round form inside where you would actually, earlier on, they would put a little bit of oil there and have a fire going on. So when you do transfer that to the paper, it doesn't look very good. And then you also have to take care of the time period. It has to fit the time period which the researcher is working on. These stones have been done also after Christ. So what does Dis Manibus means? DM, you will find it, actually we can go back, you will find it written, Dis Manibus, or you find it only as a DM on the stones, DM, DM. So mostly it's only DM because there's not a lot of space, right? So DM means to the spirits of the departed, or the dead. So I had to figure out different ways to approach it. I had to find out what paper can I use. Actually, where can I find these stones? Mostly they are in museums. How can I find a stone which is as small or as big as I needed for the book, and which kind of tells a story about a child? So how much should I describe about the research, and how much should I go into the history? So these were all questions which I had to ask myself. Then I definitely did not want only to use the stone and the beauty of this imprint on the paper. I wanted really to create a story, a narrative. So how do I make this story understandable and believable? I had to take care of elements that I had to find out what was at that time really in the city. For instance, initially I was even thinking I would use numbers of the houses, but there were no numbers 200 BC. So I had to check all the time that it is within the time period and true, but also that I have my own artistic freedom. So I was looking up archive images, I was reading texts, and I was having a lot of accumulation of material. And then, of course, I needed also, or I wanted, with Rosa's permission, to have an extract of her research. She writes a PhD, so she has a lot of texts. So I wanted a small text about what she has found out and how she approaches it. So it had to be a certain amount of text. We had to check, is it 1 page, is it 2 page, do we even get any information within 1 page? So all of that had to be worked on. So I already mentioned collecting the material. So here you can see me how I was working in this very courtyard, which I showed you before. So the stones were at the wall, I had to ask for permission. They are, of course, very precious. And I used different kind of paper. Later on I will show you the very paper. You know, paper can be having this structure, either it's short, oh, I forgot the word. I forgot the word. Well, anyway, the paper had to be thick enough to kind of get into the relief, but when it was too thick and too hard, it wouldn't work. When it was too thin, it would go in, but it wouldn't stay as a relief or relief. So that was kind of difficult. And here you can see I was wetting it a little bit, and then with a bone I was trying to press it into the relief. And there on the left side you can actually see how it appeared. fiber was the word I was looking for. So you have a paper with long fiber and with short fiber. And it appears that when you have long fibers, it's actually not so well reacting to taking the form, because it has this strength, like the Japanese papers. When it has short fiber, it actually is better for this purpose. So I had different tryouts. You can see some papers react very sensitive to water, and it actually doesn't look good. And sometimes the stones also, they were not deep enough, you know, so that was a problem. So this is one of the stones. I chose 2 stones, and this is one of the stones which I chose. And do you actually know? This is a virgin stone, because you can see the little hammer on the right corner and the other hammer on the left. That means the mason has used the stone for the first time. Because these stones, they were also reused. It was actually recycled, basically. So here you can see it's in Latin, and it's all in abbreviation. So Dis Manibus, we know that. But then Nevia Fortunata, okay? The Q is actually Ke, who. Anni is also abbreviated, 2. Mensibus is only in M, and so on. So there is this own code for describing the life of Nevia Fortunata, who has lived 2 years, 3 months, 14 days, and has gotten this stone set by her mother, Nevia Capitolina. The other stone which I chose was different, and that was what I liked about it. It was a little bit bigger, the text, a different font, and here it was actually set by the daughter to the mother. So Dis Manibus Sextilia Faustinae Pientissime fecit servilia Aphrodite filia. So the daughter is Aphrodite, and she has set the stone for her mother. So this is then clear. I chose the 2 stones. And the interesting part here is I realized while working that it has the same effect than what I talked to you about, the invisibility of history. So you see on the left side the positive page, so to say, the thing you see first. And it's even kind of more difficult to read and see than the negative, the back page. This is a little bit like with the archaeological sites. What you see on top is actually less than what is underneath. So then I had to check. I talked to you about these different archives of these abbreviations and epigraphy. I had to check that it's the right time. So there are different electronic archives where you can kind of see these stones are all marked and all collected and mentioned, and then you have the original Latin abbreviated text, the transcription into the whole Latin text. So from there I could then go and think about a possible translation. So that was about the stones, but I was talking to you about that it is about the idea to kind of follow this child through the city. So the city of Rome of that time, of course, the first idea was I need maps or some kind of map. So I had to look for that. I had to check street names because they have changed a lot. Many streets got their new names due to Catholicism. So it was always Santa Maria del Virgen or something related to the church. I wanted to also check how were the landscapes at that time. Then there were, of course, the child would walk through the street till the house, and there would be mosaics on the floor. I was thinking about the road, the different pavements, and we still have the basalt stone from the Roman roads, etc. And then I also thought about freschi and water sources, because even in our days you have lots of water sources in Rome. It's very typical for the city. So with the maps, there are of course many wonderful maps, but unfortunately many and most of them have already the Vatican in it. That means they are already after Christ. So I had to be very careful that I wouldn't be just amazed by a beautiful map, and I had to check that the time period is right. Then you have these wonderful drawings. This is a map about Romulus and his brother, kind of their hill, but it was too confusing. I had looked at maps of the Forum Romanum and was thinking of overlaying maps to create a graphic structure. I was looking at these different regions which were prevalent at the time, which Rosa was researching, the time of Augustus. And we have the Palatinum, the Circus Maximus. For instance, a map like that wouldn't go, because it's too recent. And then I had to check, and like I already presented, the different names of the streets. So this was, for instance, a street which was named and mentioned even at the time before Christ. This Vico Hugario still exists. So I had to see what was mentioned earlier and what still exists, and how can I build this path. Then I studied the street name origins. I was thinking maybe I get some idea from there, or I could even bring it into the book. And also studied where exactly certain processions or rituals were happening. And I had this Domus Romanus is the area in Forum Romanum where Augustus was living, the Palatinum. I was thinking maybe to use this typical Roman house blueprint in introducing how the child comes in. I was taking photographs of different landscapes in Rome and different water sources. Here I also had to be very careful, because there is a certain sign of the Roman city in our days, which you can easily oversee or overlook, and if you use a photo with that sign, it's quite clear that it's not from that time, which I am actually planning to show. So then I was photographing street grounds, because of course a child walking on the street is actually at this height, so it looks more down. It has this contact to the street different than us adults. And I also imagined what would be then the same than now. So there are some street pavements which are typical for the Roman time, and every archaeologist would immediately know, this is from the Roman time. Okay, marble, of course, basalt stone, also very typical, the Roman roads. Sand roads they had as well. Then different type of cobblestones, and even one time burned tiles, which were laid out in this particular pattern. Mosaics, I took lots of photos. I was very enthusiastic, but had then to learn that this is too young, this is from the time, from the Middle Ages, this hasn't been there yet, so I then had to eliminate. And freschi. So there was a lucky coincidence, because in Forum Romanum there is this house of Augustus, Casa di Augusta and Casa di Livia, his wife. And it happens that they have original freschi, like you can see, which are really dating to their time and are original. And they are original, not restored, because Augustus made a promise to his people that if he wins this and this war, he will build a temple for Apollo. And he won the war, so he filled his own house with sand and built on top a temple for Apollo. The temple didn't make it. It fell, I mean, through time, didn't make it. So when the archaeologists started to research within the temple what it was, they stumbled over the house of Augustus and Livia, and when they took all the sand and mud out, they actually found rooms which were in perfect condition. So that was big luck for me, because since it was exactly the period which I was researching, I could profit and take photos from that very period. So I take different photos and then I work on them. So now I have a lot of different material, but I have to set a structure, because each book tells you something not only by the images, but by the size, by the weight, by the format. So I had to figure out how to structure it. And of course I thought it has to be horizontal, because it's a landscape I'm going through. So I was thinking, I have title, I have text, I have this transfer from the stones. I had to find a certain rhythm through it. And the rhythm, usually, the most logical it is, the better it is. So if the viewer doesn't wonder why is now this here, then that's good. I wanted to use different languages. I was thinking, okay, I have the Latin abbreviation, the Latin transcription. Do I translate it to English or German or both? So how many pages I give to the map of Rome, how many pages I give to the streets, and so on. Then, oh, this is a bit sad, this is jumping. I was thinking to maybe use all these different words which are typical for the Domus Romanus, because they are very important. They kind of they repeat themselves. Each house is built in a certain way. But I realized that's too much. It actually goes away from the very story. And I also was thinking maybe to mention the particular words one uses in the Roman baths, which are also kind of well known for the researchers. But then I also realized that that actually has nothing to do with the children and their path. So I came to the execution. I started with the photo collage. I want to show again. So this was an old map, transparent. Underneath was another map, and then I scanned it, I made it lighter, I ordered it in a sense that I put the focus on the center of the city, because that was the place where you had the ritual places, the Palatinum and the Forum Romanum. I mentioned the different regions of the state of Augustus, and this becomes one page. The other page was, this is a tryout, different variations. Each page I had always at least 3 to 4 variations. This was kind of the approach towards Rome. So you see Rome as a city, and then I create a graphical structure around it. And this is then the double page. So you come from far away, Rome is still a small city, and then you would have the city in detail. I had to think about how is the color flowing and how is each color influencing one page and the other. So here you can see these were then, for instance, different choices, variations, and I chose one of them, which you will later see in the book. So here I have, for instance, a photo of the marble floor and a photo of the landscape, and you can see this is what I made of it, photo collage. Here you can see how many different images bring you to the final one. I had these freschi photographed, and I worked on them to give them a certain patina and atmosphere, and the final image you see down there. And here the same. Everything influences everything. If you choose one double page in a different version, it has an influence on the next double page. So you always have to see all together. Here you also see different variations. It creates a different rhythm of colors. There's a certain expectation when you turn the page and you look first onto the right page. Is this page light or is it dark? So if you might remember the photo of the pavement, here it's worked on, and I have used a photo of a sand floor and collaged on it a landscape image. So now I'm coming to the print pre-production, because if you print and you print both sides, you have to start to count how many pages, how much paper you need, and you have to be able to imagine the whole. So here I have had a layout for me of all the pages, but of course a viewer is never seeing all together, so it is difficult. This is another version. And here you have another version. The texts are only to show that the text comes there. So you think about, do you start with the transcriptions of the stones, and where comes the text? Does it come immediately after or later, and so on? So this is kind of what I came up to, because I used very different techniques. I used inkjet for printing. I used letterpress blind printing. That means you have the letters and you press them into the paper without color. And then I used the letterpress for hot foil embossing. So you have the letters and you use a foil which through heat leaves the color on the paper. And I knew that I can do that in Germany with my bookbinder, and the other things in Helsinki, in Finland. So I had to also figure out how I will organize all of that. Then of course, when you have a text concerning something of a specific time period, you also think about the font. In this case, I chose the font as near as possible to the font of the stone. So I looked at the font of the stone, or within the stones, and I wanted to find something very similar. And then the layout of the text. Different ideas, and different proofreads. I marked here the typical mistakes, which one overlooks. Here, the text layout, which was then not used, actually the other one was used. And of course, there's always an impressum, and it all has to go together and have a certain understandable, easy, readable style. So this was the final layout for the text we chose, which was given by Rosa Kalunki. And here you see that I chose by purpose that I pressed the D and the M always as a bold letter. So everywhere where I have a big D or a big M, it's bold, in remembrance of Dis Manibus. So we come to the execution. That was only the foreplay. It's jumped. Like I already mentioned, because I used different techniques, I had to also order certain plates. So I had to be aware, okay, I need 2 of those in English, 2 of those in Latin. The addendum is a whole text. The impressum I print in inkjet, but the addendum as a title I print from the mold. So you have to kind of consider what you have to order in time to get it when you then work on it. And this is how it looks like. These are actually aluminium plates. You can order them, and you will later see how it looks in paper. So then there's the paper cutting, the paper ordering, of course, first, the paper cutting later. So you consider what is cheaper. Is it by sheet? Is it a roll? You have to consider the direction of the paper, because it goes along the roll. So when you fold, you have to fold along the direction. And then comes the printing. And the printer has also his sensitive sides. He gives you immediately your image, but at the end he needs more space. So if you are in between A3 and A2, then it's quite difficult to get an arrangement with the printer. And then, of course, because it's printed on both sides, I had to actually check through the light that the middle part is precisely identical, because if you fold it and you have 2 millimeters going over, you would see it on the other side. So then I go to Germany, to my bookbinder, and this is his workshop. It's a wonderful place in a little city, Weimar, and it's 150 years been in the same family. So we cut some paper for the title pages, but otherwise the printed papers are ordered and folded by hand, as you see, then cut on the cutting machine. And here you can now see what I meant when I was saying that you press it into the paper, these plates. So this happens actually cold. You just press it. You have to figure out how much pressure you use. It can be too much or too little. This is a question of feelings. And these were the transcriptions from the Latin abbreviation into the Latin full text. It's a real old press, over 100 years old. And these were the letters which I used as a separate font for the hot foil embossing. And here is a little bit described the process. So, as I said already, the heat basically puts the pigment from the foil onto the paper and lets it be there, transfers it. And you have this little relief. And because my book was all about relief from the stones, I had to use this technique. So here you can see it visually. Sometimes you are missing a little piece of color, so you have to do it again. I marked here, for instance, some mistakes. The yellow part over there is the foil, and when you press it through, as you can see, the color leaves the foil. So this is how it is fixed onto a plate and then put into the same press as used before, but actually heated up. So, and now this is not it yet, although you have maybe done your book. Every book has a certain sensibility. It is maybe fragile, it is maybe heavy, and it has to be somehow protected. At least this is how I think it. It doesn't have to be very complicated, but of course, for me, it is also part of the idea. So I wanted it to be a little bit like the stone I worked on. That's why I chose a certain material, a paper, which actually imitates stone. It's a wallpaper, basically. And I wanted it to be open very easily, and I wanted inside the box a material which imitates the pavement, the streets. You will see it in original. It also feels different than paper because it's rubber. And then I choose, according to the images in the book and the color scale, I choose paper which goes with it. So here I have two variations. Do I imprint my DM letters in gold or very light yellow, or do I use white? And this is which I used in the end. And this is the box. And this is a double page, for instance. So I want to mention something which also relates to producing a book. You have costs. And everything depends. You can also just paint a book or do a little collage. But in this particular case, these were, for instance, the costs. You have the costs of the plates, you travel to the bookbinder, you photograph, you pay the printer or the person who helps you with the print, and you pay the paper, etc., etc. So this book has been produced in 13 pieces, so it's an edition of 13, and it is by now in all of these different collections, and thank God also in one Finnish one. So it's very, very nice to know that it will be also available in Finland. And these are the people I want to thank deeply. Of course, Alfred Kordelin Foundation, because they funded this fellowship in Vilalante, and Institutum Romano Finlandee Vilalante, because these were the people who opened me all the doors to the research. And Sebastian Hill, who is the chief librarian at the Academy in Rome, the American one, because he was really welcoming and it was very easy to access. Rosa Kalunki has given me the idea. She is really kind of the second creator in a sense. And Kona Foundation, because with the money of Kona I could actually do everything. So, that was it basically, and now I invite you to see the book in its beauty, so to say. Nyt me voidaan katsoa sen kirjan.
Todella mielenkiintoista ja ihan mieletön työ. Tekisi mieli lähteä Roomaan nyt.
Joo, erityisesti nyt. No niin, tässä on nyt, te voitte myöskin kokeilla, ota käteen, se on painava.
Joo.
Olkaa hyvä.
No niin on. Tosi hieno. Jo pelkästään tää laatikko.
Eli niin kuin mä sanoin esityksessä, että laatikkoajatus oli, että se muistuttaa myöskin tätä kiviä jotenkin. Siksi tuo paperi esimerkiksi on semmoinen, ei yhtä väriä. No sitten oli ajatus, että jos se on pelkästään laatikko, sitten on ongelma, että aina niin kun ajatellaan, okei, miten tätä otetaan pois. Siksi me tultiin siihen ideaan, että leikataan tästä osa pois, koska tässä takana on kuitenkin kaikki kiinni. Eli se on ihan selvä, aha, tämä on etupuoli, toi on takapuoli. Ja sitten voisi vaan niin kuin sillä tavalla liukasta sen ulos. Tässä muuten näette ne materiaalit irtoisena. Ja se on kiinnostava siinä mielessä, että kun sä näet sellaisen paperin, sä et niin kuin heti pystyt kuvittelemaan, että kuinka iso ero se on, jos sitä on vähemmän ja tätä on enemmän ja näin. Tämä on muuten tuo tapetti, mistä mä puhun. Tämä on ihan vaan tapetti. Joo, mun kirjan sitoja on...
Onko tämä muovikatettu?
No siellä on varmasti jonkunlainen PVC mukana, joo. Mutta tässä on paperi kyllä. Mutta tuo päällyste on varmasti luotu sillä tavalla, joo. Eli nyt se avataan sillä tavalla. Ja tuo sininen väri oli kontrastisena ajatuksena. Tuo on taas tuo kiviväri. Ja tässä on nyt tätä. Ja tämä on itse asiassa, mitä käytetään rakennustarvikeena. Jos sulla on parketti ja sulla on joku painava kone, sä suojat sun parveke. Ne on semmoisia mattoja.
Tosi kaunis.
Joo, mä näin sen ja ajattelin heti, se on vähän niin kuin katu. No niin, laitetaan sen hetkeksi sivuun.
Löytyykö nämä helposti kaikki vai onko ne kova työ varmaan ensin?
No se hyvä juttu on, jos sä olet ammattilaisen kanssa tekemisessä, eli tämä löytyy helposti, koska hänellä on ne luotamot ja sitten katsotaan, mutta tietenkin sulla täytyy olla sun oma idea. Ja mä heti niin kun ihastuin tähän ja sitten tää on vähän sama sarja paperia, semmoista ei vaan yhtä väriä. Tämä oli mun oma idea ja sitten tähän oli hyvä sauma, että joku mainitsee, että sellaista tapettia saattaa olla. Ja sitten mä menin ihan Bauhausiin katsomaan.
Ihan musta kiveä.
Joo.
Jurovan näköinen Suomessa.
Joo, totta. Tätä mä vielä en esittänyt, että toi ensimmäinen paperi Forblatt yleensä on tietenkin vain valkoinen tai litteä, mutta tässä tapauksessa minä valitsin tätä, koska siellä sisällä tulee olemaan myöskin reliefiä ja mä haluaisin ikään kuin valmentaa katsojan. Nyt tässä pitäisi, niin kuin, mä en tiedä, jos tuo valo on parempi, jos se on sivulta. Ehkä jopa, antaisitko mulle mun puhelimen? Se on vasemmalla. Ei, se ei ole siinä. Se on täällä. Se on täällä. Joo. Saattaa olla, että puhelimen valo on vielä parempi. Katsotaan. Joo, on. Katsotaan. Se on vähän parempi. Eli tämä on nyt, sitä nimetään blind printing, eli sokea paino, koska tähän periaatteessa ei ole laitettu väriä, mutta mitä te ette näe, kyllä jos mä kerron sitten, te näette, että tässä on kyllä keltainen väri ja tässä on valkoinen väri laitettu. Se on vähän kiiltävämpi kuin tuo paperi. Eli tässä on ei vaan painettu, mutta myöskin painettu väriä. Eli me mentiin siitä DM:stä Dis Manibukseen, eli transkriboidaan, mutta DM on vielä erikseen. Ja nyt on se, mistä mä puhun, että päällä sä et näe niin paljon kuin itse asiassa sitten... on väärässä. Noin. No niin. Takapuoli näyttää paljon enemmän tekstiä. Ja tää on nyt se kivi, mistä mä puhuin, että se oli... mitä se on? Virgin suomeksi?
No käyttämätön.
Joo, mutta virgin, mitä se on?
Neitsyt.
Kivi, joo, näin se on. Koska tässä on ne merkinnät, mitä tässä melkein ei näke tässä puolella, mutta toisella näkee hyvin tässä. Kato tässä. Vasara ja vasara. Okei. Ja tää on nyt se koko teksti, eli DM, Dis Manibus, ja sitten Nevia Fortunata, Che, se Q, Vicit, Annis, Due, Mensibus. Eli kaikki ne on vain lyhennyksiä, abbreviations. Ja tämä on painettu vain sillä pressillä. Ja se laata on se, mitä mä eli tein sen layoutin ja tilasin sen laatan.
Onko tämä painopaperi?
Tämä paperi on semmoinen käsin tehty antiikkipaperi, mitä mä löysin, että se oli sopivaa siihen. Ja tämä paperi on japanilainen paperi, bambu on siellä mukana, joten se on hyvin pehmeä, joka oli hyvä. Ja nyt tuli toi sama juttu, mutta englannin kielellä. Ja tässä on jo niin kuin koko lause. To the spirit of the dead, Nevia Fortunata, who lived 2 years, 3 months, 14 days, and then Nevia Capitolina, her mother, had this made. Ja tässä on myöskin se aikataulu. Ja sen mä löysin siitä arkistosta. Eli se on se virallinen käännös myöskin. No niin, nyt jatketaan. To the spirits of the death. Se oli nyt selvä. Että se
on se Dis Manibus.
Exakt, joo. Ja nyt tuli tuo toinen kivi, ja mä kerroin teille, että se oli kiinnostava, koska se oli niin erilainen. Se teksti on isompi. Joo. Ja tässä sama juttu, että sä näet paljon enemmän tästä takapuolesta. Ja se oli se Filia Aphrodite. Ja itse asiassa tässä mulla on pari, mä voisin teille näyttää, kato. Mä tein ne kokeiluja. Tässä mä kerron teille, että oli semmoisia kiviä, joissa oli keskellä esimerkiksi semmoinen aukko, mihin laitettiin öljyä ja sitten. Eli jos sä otit sen reliefin siitä kivestä, tämä ei aukene, miksi täällä ei ole mitään visuaalisesti. Se jättää semmoinen vaikutelman, tässä on joku virhe. Eli mä en voinut käyttää tätä kiviä. Tai mulla oli sitten, mulla on tässäkin pari esimerkkiä. Mulla oli semmosia, tässä oli sama juttu. Tää oli hyvä paperi, mutta joskus oli myöskin, tää oli semmoinen esimerkiksi, tässä oli yksi kivi, mistä se ei tuli riittävästi vahvaa ja se paperi on niin valkoinen, että tästä ei synty sellaista, se on japanilaista paperia. Eli tässä ei oikeastaan synty mitään vaikutelmaa. Joo, ja tämä paperi oli hyvä, mutta se väri oli ihan väärin. Eli tässä on niin monta aspektia, tässä ei näe mitään, se paperi on liian ohut ja niin poispäin. Eli piti oikeastaan todella paljon kokeilla. Okei. Laitan sen hetkeksi takaisin, mennään eteenpäin. Okei. Ja nyt on jo selvä, jos tämä on se originaali, tässä on nyt se transkriptio latinan kielellä ja tässä tulee sitten seuraava sivu, on sitten se englannin käännös. Eli semmoinen looginen rytmi oli tärkeä. No nyt tässä kerrotaan oikeastaan, mitä nyt tehdään. Tracing the steps of a child through ancient Rome. Ja tässäkin tuntuu, että se on pieni lause, mutta menee niin paljon ajatusta, miten mä sanon sen, mitä mä haluan sanoa. Sanonko tracing the steps of a child on the streets of Rome or through ancient Rome? Miten mä saan mahdollisimman paljon tietoa lyhyen lauseen? Koska ancient Rome sit tiedetään myöskin sitä ajasta. No niin, eli aloitetaan. Rooma. Ja tässä on tietenkin monta karttoja päällekkäin. Ja mulla piti katsoa tarkkaan, että tässä ei olisi jotkut pienet kylät, jotka nykyään on olemassa, mutta silloin ei ollut vielä. Sitten tätä te näette siellä. Me tullaan lähempää. Tämä on tietenkin vain graafinen elementti. Toi Tiber-joki on toki toi. Ja tästä mä puhuin, että nykykartoissa heti tässä alueella on se Vatikaani. Ja tässä sitä ei vielä ole. Sitten te ette nähnyt siitä. Me tultiin nyt keskustasta enemmän keskukseen. Ja tässä on toi Circus Maximus. Ja sen vieressä on Palatinum. Ja tässä on toi Circus Maximus, niin kuin näette. Ja tässä on Villa Augusta ja Casa di Livia, koska me tullaan sitten nähdä niiden freskoja. Eli nyt mä ikään kuin kuvitelen, että mä kävelen sen lapsen kanssa näiden katujen päällä ja vettä on aina, siitä oli varmasti silloin jo. Tässä on erilaisia kiviä vaan hiottu, sellaista on ja sitten tämä ei ole edes väri käsitelty, se on ihan oikeasti sen näköistä kuin ne lehdet putoo. Tässä on toi tiili-tyyppinen roomalainen tie ja Tässä on hieka ja sen päällä on sitten Photo Collageissa laitettu pinja. Ja samalla tavalla tässä on toi marmori. Tässä on nyt ne mosaiikit. Eli me ollaan jo lähellä taloa, nyt me mennään talon sisään. Tämä on muuten myöskin hyvin tyypillinen roomalainen tapa rakentaa. Jos joku arkeologi näkee semmoinen seinän, se tietää heti mistä ajasta se on. Ja tämä on itse asiassa siitä Augustuksen kotosta. Osittain myöskin tämä on kyllä eri paikasta ja tietenkin on asiat yhdistetty, jotka eivät välttämättä ole olleet samassa paikassa.
Se kiilä niin kirjoissa yleensä on se kielto.
Joo. Ja tässä on nyt toi Rosa Kalunkin tutkimusekstrakti. Ja niin kuin kerroin, tässä kaikki D:t ja M:t on aina paksuna. Ja minä päätin, että jos on joku referenssi, siitä tullaan lukemaan heti, eli ei vasta lopussa. Ja tässä nyt kerrotaan 2 tapausta. Ja mulla oli mahdollisuus vaikuttaa tai valittaa, ja mä valitsin yhden pojan ja yhden tytön. Se poika oli peräti 4 tai 2 vuotta, mä en nyt näe. Mä luulen Vichit, Annis. Joo, se oli 4 vuotta. Ja se tyttö oli kai 6. Ja heillä oli selkeästi näissä kivessä merkattu, että heillä oli tehtäviä. Esimerkiksi hänellä oli vulkaanin, mitä se on, kultin, semmoinen kulti. Prêtre on, että hän oli niinku priest, eli pappi. Joo, hänellä oli pappitehtävä 4-vuotiaana. Mutta se idea ei ole niin kummallinen, koska lapset tietenkin ne olivat puhtaita. Ja se puhtaus tässä tapauksessa on semmoinen sakraalinen elementti. Eli tässä te näette taas ne D:t ja M:t, ne tulee esiin. Ikään kuin pieni muistutus, mistä me puhumme. Tässä on impressum, eli mielestäni jokaisessa kirjassa pitäisi olla sellainen, että se avautuu vähän kuka, missä, miten, kenen kanssa, millä materiaalilla, kuinka monta kappaletta tehnyt. Ja koska meillä on impressum, meillä on addendum. Ja addendum on siis lisuke. Ja tämä on nyt toi addendum. Ja täällä mä mainitsen alfabeettisesti kaikki ne herrat ja naiset, jotka olivat jotenkin mielestäni tärkeä. Tietenkin se on sellainen sekoitus, mulle piti myöskin katsoa, että se mahtuu yhden sivuun ja näin poispäin. Ja tässä on vielä myöskin pikkusen huumoria mukana, koska tietenkin latinan alfabeetissa ei ole koota, mutta K on Kalunki Rosa, siitä on pakko mainita. Ja sitten Goethe tietenkin ei liity ollenkaan Roomaan siihen aikaan, mutta Goethella oli mielipide Horatiuksesta ja Horatius liittyi siihen aikaan. Ja näin muodostui semmoinen oma pieni tarina, mihin voi niin kuin vielä upoa, jos haluaa. Eli se on semmoinen pieni tosiaan addendum lisuke. No niin, ja tässä on taas se, millä me aloitettiin, eli semmoinen pieni pehmeä paperi, joka ikään kuin nyt tietenkin on loogista, että se on siellä, koska se ikään kuin ottaa sen reliefin kertomuksen jo mukaan.
Aivan ihan.
Aloitettu
Tuo tarina.
vuonna 18 ja se menee vuosia meni sitten.
No, mä tein sen aikana myöskin muita kirjoja ja viime vuonna se on ollut valmis jo. Joo. Ja tässä mä halusin teille näyttää esimerkiksi tää on nyt irralleen, mutta just, että te pystytte nähdä. Joo, sillä lailla ne on ja sitten niitä vielä sidotaan. Ja sitten näitä eri papereita. Tää on itse asiassa, tämä paperi on sama paperi kuin se, mihin on tulostettu. Eli se paperivalinta myöskin niin kuin vaikuttaa kokonaisuuden. Otanko vain yhden paperin käyttöön tai monet, ja jos mulla on monta, millä rytmillä mä pystyn niitä käyttämään. Jos ne on sidottu, sitten se tulee aina uudestaan toisessa hetkessä, ja sen kaikki täytyy jotenkin miettiä.
Mikä paperi tämä oli?
Tämä oli se japanilainen bambupituinen, mutta siellä on myöskin japanilaisessa paperissa on aina pitkä kuitu, mutta se on semmoinen 170 grammaa, mutta se vaikuttaa oikeastaan vähemmän.
Onko toi vesialasti, joka oli tuossa kirjassa, niin just niiltä kaduilta, missä ne lapset on kulkenut?
Joo.
Kaikki on. Ja.
Siis on, mun meni näin, että nämä siis ne pappi tai poika.
Joo.
Oliko niillä joku, siis ne oli
kuoli 4-vuotiaana, ja sitten kun ne kuoli, heille laitettiin semmoisen kiven, missä kerrotaan, mitä oli heidän tehtävä. Ja sen kautta nykyään voi itse asiassa todistaa, että on ollut pappilapset, koska tässä on semmoinen kive. Mutta ne kivet, jotka minä käytin tässä kirjassa, mistä minä otin reliefi, ne olivat vain yksi lapsi, joka laitoi sen omille äidille. Et mulla ei oli teksti, missä mainitaan, että joku on pappi mun reliefissä.
Ei ne mitenkään niinku ollut uhrattu, mitä lapsia ei ollut?
Ei kuollut muuten. Ei ne on uhrattu, ei.